Welcome everybody to the third and final STSC Presents workshop. For those of you who don't, there's a lot of familiar faces. Hey Rob. There's a lot of familiar faces in here, so for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Bel Culverhouse. I am the choir director at Binghamton University, and I'm also the artistic director of the Southern Tier Singers Collective. We have a number of Southern Tier Singers Collective singers with us amongst y'all right now. We've got Christina Taylor over here, and Greg Keeler over here, and Barb Powell over here, and Barb Crowell over there. So the four of them, I might actually sort of raise an eyebrow at one or the other of them and say, would you mind demonstrating X, Y, or Z? But anyway. So this is about moderating vibrato, and it's about both directions. In other words, actually let me phrase this as a question. How many of you came here tonight because you don't usually sing with much vibrato at all, and you would like to learn how to sing with more upon occasion to be more expressive? 3 people. 4, 3.5, 4, 5. Okay. How many of you usually sing with a fair amount of vibrato and would like to be able to sing with less upon occasion? Okay. How many of you sing with a sort of a middling amount of vibrato and would like to be able to sing with both more and less, if you want?
Oh, can you raise your hand?
All right. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to address all of those desires. And so I'm going to talk a little bit at first about how vibrato happens to the extent that we know. And I say that because there's still a lot about vibrato that we're not 100% sure about. And we're discovering new things about vibrato with every passing year. So check back with me next year and this might all be different, but for now. So vibrato is caused by a recurring variation in the tension of the little teeny tiny muscles that are inside your larynx. And they are the muscles that control how tightly stretched your vocal folds are. And most of you know that when your vocal folds are stretched tighter, it produces a higher pitch, and when they are looser, it produces a lower pitch. And there are actually 2 sets of muscles that do that. There's one set of muscle that changes the angle of the top portion of the larynx relative to the bottom portion of the larynx, and that muscle stretches the vocal folds thinner. And then there's another muscle that's inside the vocal folds themselves. It's called the vocalis muscle, or sometimes called the thyroarytenoid muscle, and that bunches the vocal folds up thicker, and that makes the pitch lower. So those 2 sets of muscles work in conjunction, but they do opposite functions, if that makes sense. So it's a recurring variation in the tension levels of those muscles that usually varies at the rate of about 6 oscillations per second. And I'll say more about that in a moment. That variation in the tension levels is stimulated by the vagus nerve that comes off of the spinal cord. Okay? So that means that the vagus nerve is also in control of a whole bunch of other things in the body, and most of them are not under conscious control. So the diaphragm is connected to the vagus nerve, aspects of your digestive system are connected to the vagus nerve, etc. So that means that if you sing with a certain balance between various sets of muscles and various configuration of stuff, vibrato will simply happen. Vibrato is not something where you consciously control every individual oscillation. In other words, you can, if you wish, and everybody do this, go, right, so what you were doing was consciously controlling the up and down. You can do that by consciously controlling the pitch, and if you slow it down, you get, just do that. Right? And you're simply sliding the pitch of your voice up and down. You can also do it with your abdominal muscles. So if you hold a steady pitch, and then you tense your abdominal wall, you'll get a pulsation that is more a pulsation of volume than a pulsation of pitch. So everybody sit in a manner where your spine feels nice and tall, and Your thorax is expanded, and your shoulders are relaxed, and your neck is tall. And first, simply observe your natural breathing. You should feel most of the expansion from your breathing around the midsection if your thorax is already expanded and your shoulders are relaxed and your spine is nice and tall. So just feel the breathing around your midsection. Now, next, begin to exhale, and then after you begin to exhale, push the air out really fast by using your sit-up muscles. Ready? Go. Yep, and the only thing that should move are these muscles here. Everything else stays open and relaxed and stable. Try it again. Ready? Breathe out and... Right, so you felt the contraction here in your sit-up muscles, right? Okay? Now, if you go... and you'll notice that there's some pitch variation too because of the suddenness of the change in air pressure. So what you're going to do is you're going to do that exhalation that you just did, and then you're going to, instead of just doing one push with these muscles, you're going to kind of go like that with your sit-up muscles. Okay? So expand, begin to breathe out, and go to the abs. And you feel it right here. Yeah? Okay? So those are two examples. The first one was with the larynx, and the second one was with the abdominal muscles, of conscious control over what we refer to as a manufactured vibrato. Now, is a manufactured vibrato all bad? No, not necessarily. In fact, a manufactured vibrato is often used on purpose in certain styles of Broadway singing and in some kinds of jazz, because what you want in those particular moments is a very wide vibrato that creates a dramatic effect. So there's nothing wrong with a manufactured vibrato, but it's fatiguing because you're consciously contracting muscles over and over and over again, and if you do that for a long period of time, they're just going to get tired. The tiny, tiny, tiny little contractions of the muscles inside the larynx are muscles that are constantly contracting and relaxing whenever you speak and change the pitch of your voice. And the vagus nerve stimulates them to do these little teeny oscillations that are no more than what they do when you're talking all day. So therefore, the muscles inside the larynx don't become any more fatigued when you're singing with vibrato than when you're singing without. Okay. So that kind of takes care of points A and B at the top. And the last thing I'll say about point B is that because what you're doing is simply setting up a configuration where the vagus nerve will allow the vibrato to happen, the airflow to produce natural vibrato stays absolutely steady. The airflow does not waver at all. Now, obviously the airflow is going to increase if you're doing a crescendo, it's going to decrease if you're doing a diminuendo, etc. But in order to accomplish natural vibrato, the airflow stays absolutely steady. So that's an important thing to remember. So I want to just do a couple of exercises to establish even airflow, and the first thing that I'm going to do are some unpitched breathing exercises. I did these in the first workshop about care and maintenance of the voice, and so I'm just going to kind of take you through them real quick. So we're going to find a tall and open posture, and I'm going to have you do the thorax opening exercise from a seated position, so it's lifting your arms up ballet-ishly, but relax the shoulders while your arms are up. Keep the spine tall, but relax the shoulders. Now, with relaxed shoulders, but you'll also notice that while your arms are up like this, your thorax is expanded. With relaxed shoulders and expanded thorax, let the arms drift down, keep the thorax open and the shoulders relaxed. And when your arms hit your thighs, you'll notice that the thorax is open and expanded, and the shoulders are relaxed. So that's the basic singing position, right? Okay, so, and in this position, you will also notice that you feel the expansion and contraction around your midsection when you inhale and exhale. So we're going to inhale silently for 4. It's important that it stays silent. Who remembers why? Anybody? If you hear any noise in the inhalation, what's going on?
Tension.
Tension, exactly. There's something in the way. The sound of the air passing over something is causing friction, which gives you the sound. If everything's completely open, there's no sound when you inhale. So silent inhalation over 4 counts and hissing out over 4 counts. Ready, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and 2, 3, 4. In on 2, sh on 6. Breathe in, 2, and sh. Nope, I saw some people do this already. That means that you had let your spine collapse and your shoulders come down. So re-tallify your spine. And your shoulders shouldn't move, and your body shouldn't move, and your thorax really shouldn't move either. The only thing that moves is your midsection. So be tall, be open, and now breathe in, 2, and sh. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, and sh. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In on 1, f on 11. Breathe in and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Breathe in and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now I'm going to bring something to your attention, in particular in this workshop, that I don't always micromanage. But the pitch of your sound that you're making should stay constant if the breath expenditure is staying constant. So you shouldn't do shh. Did you hear my SH sound get lower in pitch? If my breath expenditure is nice and smooth, which is what we want, my SH sound or my F sound or my TH sound or whatever will stay at the same pitch. So this time, as you're listening to yourself as you exhale, make sure that whatever pitch you end up starting with, you stay with for the full 11 counts. So ready, breathe in and 2, steady, 4, steady, 6, steady, 8, steady, 10, 11. Now it's going to be in on 1, TH out on 15. Tallify yourselves. Ready, breathe in, and 2, steady pitch, 4, 5, 6, steady pitch, 8, 9, 10, steady pitch, 12, 13, 14, 15. Breathe in, and 2, 3, steady, 5, 6, 7, nice and tall, 9, 10, 11, keep it open, 13, 14, 15. Okay? So that's just an exercise in stability of breath expenditure, which is what you need in order to have nice, even vibrato happen. Okay? So the final thing that I'm going to do is just have everybody do the first of the Stemple vocal function exercises, which is an E vowel on an F below middle C for tenors and basses, and an F above middle C for sopranos and altos. And we're not going to do it for the longest possible duration, we're just going to do it for 15 seconds. All right, so here's the pitch. And the idea here is to be, in the Stemple vocal function exercises, you want to be pianissimo and last as long as you possibly can. In this one, let's be mezzo piano to mezzo forte, but the idea is that the E vowel should be absolutely even. Now for this, I don't want you to micromanage your vibrato. If a lot of vibrato comes out, that's fine. If 0 vibrato comes out, that's fine. Just do your natural, default, feel-good, open, easy, relaxed sound, okay? So, ready, breathe in, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Good. We're going to do it one more time, and I want you to increase the dynamic level 1 notch. Whatever you were doing that time, do 1 notch louder. Open, tall, breathe in, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Good. Now, I'm just going to make an observation. A number of you raised your hands about wanting to be able to sing with less vibrato. The sound that you just made had very little vibrato, and it was a nice, free, open sound, and it was very streamlined, and very steady, and very even. So, reflect on that for a moment if you were one of the people who raised their hands about wanting to sing with less vibrato, because you just did it. Now, I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But just to describe the characteristics of vibrato. Vibrato is an oscillation in 3 dimensions. It's an oscillation of pitch, in other words, the pitch goes up and down a little bit. It's an oscillation in amplitude, meaning the sound gets a little bit louder as the pitch goes higher and a little bit softer as the pitch goes lower. So they work in tandem. And then thirdly, it's an oscillation in terms of timbre. So the sound gets a little bit brighter as the pitch goes up and a little bit darker as the pitch goes down. And we're talking very, very, very minute variations in pitch and loudness and tone color. Tiny, tiny little variations. But all 3 of those dimensions occur in a normal vibrato. So let me talk a little bit about the ideals of vibrato, and I put that in quotes because the truth of the matter is there's no such thing as an ideal vibrato. There are lots of different ideal vibratos depending upon what style of music you're singing, right? So these ideals are the ideals of Western classical singing and what musical theater folks refer to as legit musical theater singing. Those of you who are musical theater folks understand that legit doesn't mean that anything other than legit is illegitimate. It simply means that legit musical theater singing is the kind of musical theater singing that is closest to Western classical singing. Okay? So normally the vibrato width is a quarter step up and a quarter step down. And so everybody take out your phone, and if you can download a free app onto your phone, I'm going to ask you to do it right now. If not, then you can look on with a neighbor. But the app that I want you to download is called Quantz Tuner. It's free. And I mean, there's a paid version. You don't need the paid version.
Did you say quant?
Quantz. So I'm going to write it up here.
Quantz Tuner.
4 quarter tones.
Okay, Quantz Tuner. Now, if you are not downloading this app onto your phone right now, do sit next to somebody who is, because this is actually kind of fun, and you will enjoy sharing this with one another. If your phone is giving you fits, then just scoot next to somebody who has succeeded in downloading it. It's not necessary that every single person have it in front of them, but you're going to want to hold your phone next to your neighbor so that they can sing into it as well. Now, I'm not going to go into everything about how Quantz Tuner works. It's super fun, and it does a lot of different fun things. But the thing that we're going to use 2 of its functions tonight. The first function that I want you to find is the one that is represented by the oval icon at the left-hand side. And it looks like this. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a few seconds to find it. If you're downloading it for the first time, your phone, it might ask you all these wacko questions, and just tell it, okay, fine, go away. It's an iPhone and an Android thing. There's both versions.
It's not coming up on Google Android.
Does anybody have an Android phone that has found it? Are all of the people who have found it iPhone users? I'm seeing iPhones being turned. I know that, I had my students download it just a few weeks ago, and they had some Android users among them, and they were able to find it and download it. So I know that it must exist.
It shows up as a...
There's a tutorial you have to skip through.
Oh, you have to go through the tutorial.
Okay. What?
There you go. You're on.
Don't if you're having trouble, just go find a neighbor who's gotten it up and running.
I got it.
Reseat yourselves so that you've got a neighbor
You
near.
can have someone over here if you want.
Okay, now what this little oval thing does is that the oval goes tall if you have gone sharp, and it goes wide if you have gone flat. And if you have gone so sharp that you're actually singing something closer to the next half-step pitch upwards, it will change color. Same thing if you have gone so flat that you have gone more than a quarter step down, then it will change color the other direction. So we're going to do that E vowel again. Here's the F natural. Okay. Hold the phone close enough to your mouth that it's picking up more you than other people. And you're going to see how in tune you can make your F natural E vowel. Ready and go. Good. So what you should have seen is a purple circle that wiggled, that kind of jelloed a little bit, right? The jello is your natural vibrato. And if it changed color, then your vibrato was more than a quarter step upwards or downwards. If it stayed purple, then you were staying within the kingdom of F natural.
Cool.
Okay? Now, so this is a great way to check intonation with students because it's super visual and super instantaneous. All right, so put that away for just a second. We're going to bring it back out in just a moment. But it's super fun and it's free and it's easy, right? So here's the thing. It is impossible because the little oscillations of those muscles, I'm going to try to make sure that I'm staying within the, all right, I'll sit back down. The little oscillations of those muscles are controlled by the vagus nerve, which means they're not under conscious control. If you sustain a pitch, it is impossible for you to sing it with absolutely zero vibrato. There will always be a tiny, tiny bit of oscillation. And so when you're looking to minimize vibrato, that is exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to minimize it, not eliminate it. If you clench your vocal mechanism so much that you absolutely remove vibrato, number one, you will fatigue very quickly. And number two, you will find that the pitch either drifts sharp or flat. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to check out the second cool feature of the Quantz tuner thing, and that is the one that with the sine wave icon. And what you should see is a list of pitches over on the left-hand side with horizontal lines extending rightwards from them. Okay? And if it's picking up any room noise, then the pitches are kind of like going up and down like this, right? Okay? So you're going to sing that same E vowel, and you should be looking for the same color. It should be purple. And you will see the oscillations in real time in front of you. And if your oscillations are so wide that it changes pitch, it'll change color. All right? So E vowel on the F natural, see if you can remember it. Here we go. Ready and sing. Good. Now, did you notice that it had squiggles?
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you were trying to sing with vibrato or not, it was there.
Sure.
So, when you sing, those little teeny oscillations are always present. Now, next thing that's fun, I'm going to ask you to sing with a deliberately enormous vibrato. Okay? Whatever that means to you. Ready? And go. Good. All right. Now you probably saw it like going all over the place in lots of different colors, right?
Yeah.
Okay? Now, we're going to start off with a huge vibrato, and then we're going to try to narrow it down to a minimized vibrato pitch, and we're going to see if we can keep it within the purple color. All right? So you'll see it go from lots of colors to 3 different colors to 1 color. Here we go. Ready? And sing. Now you can play with that until the cows come home at home. But I just wanted to introduce it to you, and I'm going to refer to some of the concepts that you just saw visualized through the course of the rest of this presentation. So I'm back to the handout now, and I'm on letter F, number 1, pitch variation, and I'm now going to be talking about little subletter B. So in choral singing, it is ideal to keep the vibrato only a quarter step up and a quarter step down. And there's a reason for that. So here's a pitch. And here's the next half step up. And here's the next half step down. Okay? In choral singing, a bunch of people are singing the same pitch at the same time. So if we're singing the center pitch, then you'll see one person's vibrato look like this, and another person's vibrato look like this, and a third person's vibrato look like this, maybe it's a little bit faster, and a fourth person's vibrato maybe look like this and it's a little bit slower. But look at the aggregate collection of pitches. The audience will still recognize this relatively narrow pitch band as the center pitch. If you have choral singers who are singing with vibratos that are as much as a half step up and a half step down, in other words, the purple ventures into the next color up and the next color down and goes back and forth among three colors, and it's relatively easy to get Quantitutor to do that. But what you get when a whole bunch of people do it at the same time is this. That's a cluster chord.
Yeah.
The audience will hear three different simultaneous pitches. And so, fortunately for us as singers, an audience that has been exposed to choral singing before has unintentionally developed the capacity to edit out some of that wide pitch band and figure out, in other words, they extrapolate mentally what the pitch is supposed to sound like, but it's the audience's ear and brain that is doing that, not the singer's voices. The singer's voices are not helping. So, if you made a sort of a spectrogram of that F natural with a whole bunch of singers who were singing vibratos that had an ambitus, or a pitch range, of a half step up and a half step down, what an untrained ear, or a computer, would hear is this. Okay? So, I say that because even though a vibrato that wide is problematic in choral singing, for the reason I just demonstrated, it's the normal vibrato width in Western classical solo singing and in most Broadway solo singing is a half step up and a half step down. And a narrower vibrato than that will strike a listener as particularly narrow. So if I sing, I'm going to give myself a starting pitch.
Go.
I'm going to sing the opening of the first song of Schubert's Winterreise, and I'm going to do it first with no vibrato. Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd zieh ich wieder aus. Der Mai war mir gewogen, mit manchem Blumenstrauß. Okay? Now here's with vibrato of approximately a half step up and a half step down. And you will hear that this does not sound abnormally wide, okay? Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd zieh ich wieder aus. Der Mai war mir gewogen, mit manchem Blumenstrauß. Right? Fairly normal. But that was probably about a half step up and a half step down. And maybe in a couple of moments where I was doing a swell kind of thingy, it might have been even wider than that. So, fun fact, there has been a study about sopranos over the past 100 years that focused on the perché signore moment of the climax of the Puccini aria Vici d'arte, and looked at bunches and bunches of singers over the past 100 years. and found that there actually is a linear trend of vibrato getting wider and slower over the past 100 years. You can actually track it. And that about 100 years ago, the sopranos who sang that aria tended to have vibratos that were a quarter step up and down, or even less. Now imagine Puccini sung with that narrow a vibrato. The widest in this particular study was Mirella Freni. And, I mean, Mirella Freni has a spectacularly beautiful instrument, right? In her latest recording of Tosca, the vibrato on that high B flat was a perfect fourth.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is, when we get used to listening to, especially operatic singers with vibratos that wide, I mean, it sounds dramatic, but it's not going to strike every single member of the audience as inappropriately wide. Because it sounds dramatic and it's thrilling, right? So, that all of which is to say that vibrato width is dependent upon style and audience expectation. So, as I say in point C, the vibrato can be even wider than a half step up and a half step down in large-voiced elite singers. That's not only true of Western classical music. Think about Liza Minnelli, for example. That was a pretty wide vibrato and also a very slow one. But she was an amazing singer. And the artistry I mean, even up through the very end of her career. I mean, yes, it was different from when she was younger, but it was not less artistic, right? And then it's narrower, even approaching zero, particularly in early music, and also in folk music and some jazz. And then in jazz and Broadway, it's very common to hold a tone without vibrato for a certain portion, and then add vibrato towards the end. And that's actually an exercise that we're going to do in just a moment. Speed, normally between 6 and 7 oscillations per second. And an interesting illustration of the fact that a normal vibrato in Western classical music is between 6 and 7 oscillations per second is the comfort with which singers are able to sing Baroque runs at quarter note equals 96. So, to illustrate that, let me see if I can pitch it in a way that's comfortable for most of the people in the room. Okay, if you remember it, just sing it. 1, 2, 3, and 4. For unto us a child is born. That's quarter note equals 96. And the coloratura feels like a piece of cake at that speed. And if you go much faster, it starts to be effortful. And if you go slower, it's harder. Right? So just to prove that, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. For unto us a child is born. It feels labored, right? And it just kind of flies at 96. Now, let's try it a little faster than 96, and you'll feel that this is also a little bit more difficult. Ready? And go. For unto us a child is born. Right? It's like you have to struggle to keep up. Right? So there's a reason for that. 96 is equivalent to 6.4 oscillations per second. And most people find that coloratura is easiest when the coloratura lines up with their vibrato speed. So when you line up the coloratura with your vibrato speed, and your vibrato speed is between 6 and 7 cycles per second, coloratura at quarter note equals 96, which is the normal tempo of most Baroque runs, just flies off the page. So, little fun fact. Yeah. So faster than 7 oscillations per second nowadays is referred to as a tremolo, but 100 years ago, if you listen to the recordings of historic singers, the vibrato was much faster, 8 cycles per second, or even faster than that. So tastes change. Slower than that is usually referred to as a wobble, unless you're Mirella Freni. Or Birgit Nilsson. Interesting, Birgit Nilsson has a very slow vibrato, but it's also very narrow. Whereas if you listen to her singing Brunhilde, it's not a wide vibrato at all. Her voice is the size of the Empire State Building. But the vibrato is not, interestingly. You listen to Hildegard Behrens or even Deborah Voigt singing the same thing, and the vibrato is wider than Birgit Nilsson's, even though Birgit Nilsson's voice was bigger. So That's what I say in point E there on the handout. Some large voice and lead singers are closer to 5 oscillations per second. So that would be people like Birgit Nilsson, Varela Frani. Okay, so here's where we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. And this is where I'm going to have the chart up here. What affects vibrato? Vibrato happens easiest within a certain range of 2 variables for your voice. And I say range because there isn't one sweet spot. There's a sweet range within which vibrato happens, outside of which you have to manufacture it. Okay? So there are the 2 variables that I'm referring to are airflow, in other words, how much air, the quantity of air that's passing through your vocal folds, and glottal closure. In other words, when your vocal folds come together and then move apart and come together and move apart, right, when the voice works, the vocal folds either stay touching one another for a fairly long instant and then they go beep, 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 and let little air out in little teeny puffs, or they stay open longer and they only touch relatively for relatively short duration. Now, obviously, we're talking, at an A440 for sopranos and altos, that back and forth motion is happening 440 times per second, right? Okay, that's what that means. So that means that if you're singing with a large amount of glottal closure, which we call a high closure quotient, that means that for the 440 times that your vocal folds come together, every single one of those times, they're staying together for a large chunk of that oscillational cycle. Okay? And if you're singing that same A440 with a low glottal closure quotient, then your vocal fold opening is staying open most of the time, and it's only touching very, very briefly, and then it goes back to open. Okay? There's a big difference in the sound. So we hear a higher glottal closure quotient as having more core, usually a brighter color, more impact, more intensity. We hear a lower closure quotient as being lighter in weight and usually slightly softer in dynamic and not quite as bright. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to sing with a low closure quotient and then a high closure quotient. I'm going to try to keep all other variables the same. This is low. This is high. Okay? So you'll notice that the second one sounded a little bit louder, it sounded a little bit brighter, and sounded a little bit more intense, right? Okay. And then, so those are the 2 variables. Now, the combinations of those variables, the different ways you can sing with both of those things, result in what we call phonatory modes, or modes of phonation, and I'm at Roman numeral 2, letter A right now. So, whisper is high airflow and actually 0 glottal closure. Your vocal folds are not coming together at all. So say, hi Bill, this is fascinating. I'm not falling asleep at all. I am not falling asleep at all. Right? Your voice box was not functioning. The air was simply passing through the vocal folds, and we heard vowels and consonants because of what our tongue and jaw position and teeth and lips were doing. Okay? If you speak really, really breathily and you waste a lot of air, then you have breathy phonation. Breathy phonation is still relatively high airflow. A lot of air is passing through the vocal fold opening, which is why it's wasteful and why you run out of breath so quickly when you sing breathily. But my glottal closure is at least something instead of 0. So say, hi Bill.
Hi, Bill.
This is fascinating.
This is fascinating.
I'm still not falling asleep.
I'm still not falling asleep.
Okay, then if you come more towards center, you get what we call flow phonation. Flow phonation is kind of defined as the most efficient operation for the least effort. So it's medium airflow and medium glottal closure. It's what you want to be using most of the time when you're singing in a choir. And it's what you're probably using when you sing mezzo piano or softer if you're singing in Western classical technique or in many other styles. Then I'm going to call the next one Bel Canto. Let me just make sure that I'm adhering to what I say. Yep. So, and so Western classical solo singing at mezzo forte, dynamic, and higher, it involves a higher amount of glottal closure. In other words, the vocal folds stay touching one another for a longer period of time during each oscillational cycle, right? The airflow, in other words, the amount of air that's passing through, is about the same. Now, if you're a physics person, then you might wonder, okay, how is that possible? And the answer to those of you who are physics-brained people is that in order to keep the airflow the same, when what in effect you're doing is increasing the resistance against the airflow is you have to pressurize the airflow more. So, Western classical solo technique at mezzo forte and higher involves a higher level of air pressure below the voice box, below the vocal folds. We call that subglottic pressure, relative to what we call flow phonation. Okay? And then there's the evil thing. Pressed phonation is when you're keeping the glottis together as much as you possibly can, which increases the resistance against the airflow tremendously. And so in order to get the air to flow, you have to increase the pressure extremely as well. Pressed phonation is the one form of phonation that is correlated with nodes. Now, here's an evil little secret. An elite opera singer sings right there. You hear about pop stars who get nodes all the time. You don't hear about the opera singers because they keep it under wraps. But it still happens. And it happens just as commonly as injuries in any sport. These are people who are athletes with their voices. And sports involve physical risk. We have this stigma in society that having vocal trouble means that you have poor technique. The reality for many opera singers is that their technique isn't poor, but the demands of their schedule are such that it's just repetitive trauma. Their technique is great, but in this world and in this market in which they must sing and make a living, they sometimes don't have the luxury of turning down enough gigs because there are 7,000 other singers of exactly the same voice part who know the exact same roles backwards and forwards from memory that are ready to step in. And that we know that happens in Broadway, and we say, oh, isn't it a shame that these poor folks in Broadway are getting forced into this situation by the market? It happens in opera too. So,
Repetitive stress syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here are the 5 modes of phonation. Now, here's the thing. Somewhere between, and I'm going to draw the line through the words on purpose. Somewhere in here is where vibrato happens naturally. And I'm going to demonstrate that by having you sing that F natural eval again, and I'm going to sprint over. And I'm going to ask you to sing it with what you consider to be your normal, comfortable vibrato. And then what we're going to do to the tone is we're going to make it breathier and breathier and breathier and breathier. And you will hear that your vibrato peters out once it gets to a certain quantity of breathiness. Ready? Eval, go. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
The vibrato just vanished.
Yeah.
Okay? Now we're going to do the other direction. We're going to make the tone heavier and more intense and forceful until the vibrato disappears. Ready? and the vibrato goes away, right? Okay, so the reason I show that is because Scott McCoy, who is at Ohio State, and he's the author of a book called Your Voice and Inside View, which is a brilliant explication of vocal anatomy and physiology. And there's also an abridged version of it called Your Voice, The Basics. And that's much shorter, but it still has great information. So he has found that among his students who take voice lessons and also sing in choir, when they are attempting to minimize vibrato, they have one of three strategies. They either increase the closure quotient slightly from their vibrato setting, and as you heard happen with us, the vibrato goes away. Or they decrease the closure quotient and make the tone slightly breathier, and the vibrato also goes away. There is a third strategy that Scott himself hasn't quite figured out yet, and that's the people who, according to all ways that we have of measuring what's going on in the mechanism, make no change whatsoever, but they're able to turn the vibrato on or off. That's kind of me, because I've always been able to just do it or not do it, and the sound of my voice stays exactly the same either way. So what he found is that among that third category, it tends to include more medium and lighter weight voices than heavier voices, and that they just sort of do it without thinking about it. But in any case, the reason I wrote this up here as a range is because everybody has a healthy range of closure and airflow within which you can sing with or without vibrato until the cows come home. So if you're finding the right balance between these two variables for yourself, then you will find the position where the combination where you can sing without fatigue, either with vibrato or without vibrato. Okay? So, there are a couple of other things that are kind of obvious that students have reported affect their ability to find the comfortable vibrato place or non-vibrato place. And that one of them is how high the larynx floats or floats down. Musical theater singing tends to desire a slightly higher larynx position than Western classical singing, which wants a lower larynx position. A lot of pop and folk music also wants a higher larynx position. Your larynx can move up and down in a variety of positions healthily, but there is such a thing as too high or too low. And you'll know because you get really tired really fast if it's too high for too long, or if it's too low for too long. If you're not getting tired, then you can make the larynx go higher or lower to change the quality of the voice without fatiguing. The other thing is tone color and the subjective experience of placement. So the next experiment that we're going to do is the same eval. I know that you're going to get tired of an eval, but and what we're going to do is I'm going to say, imagine the tone forward and try to feel the sympathetic vibrations further forward in the face, and then imagine the tone further back and feel the sympathetic vibrations in the back of the pharynx and along the back wall of the throat, and see if that affects your vibrato. It works differently for every person. So start with a centered tone, and then bring it forward when I do this, and bring it back when I do this, and see what happens, right? Ready? Go. What'd you notice? Nothing?
It got straighter when it was up here.
Okay, so for you, placing it forward made it easier to sing without vibrato? Okay. Anybody have the opposite experience? It got easier to sing without vibrato when it was placed further back? Yes, sort of. Okay, all right.
I don't have
It's
much.
different. There's no right or wrong about that. It's different for every person. And with a different group of people in this workshop, we might find most of the people find it easier to go without vibrato backwards rather than forwards. Then the final thing is your imagination of the tone. And we're about to go on to the second sheet here. I'm just keeping an idea of time. We're doing good. So here's my first hypothesis about singing both with and without vibrato. You have to want it. So if you right now sing with very little vibrato, and you kind of think that you ought to be able to sing with more vibrato, if you're doing it because you think you ought to, it's probably not going to happen. If you actually like the sound of a voice with a lot of vibrato, and you want to do it, it probably will. So, I mean, the thing is, if you're happy with your voice the way it is, you don't necessarily need to monkey around with it because somebody else says so, unless it's necessary to monkey around with it to do something that you really want to do with it, in which case you have to figure out how to do that thing, right? So, but the brain is very skilled at getting the voice to mimic. So if I do, just do that. Right? You didn't think about it, you just did it. Many teachers will use mimicry in pedagogy, and not because they're getting the students to imitate their own sound, but what they'll do is imitate the student's technique first, and then they'll do it the way they want the student to do it. And what the student, you're smiling, yeah. What you do is you demonstrate the student's production first, and then you demonstrate what you want the student to do, and then the student ends up mimicking the change rather than the teacher's sound. I do it all the time with my choir students at Binghamton. I'll be like, tenors, you're singing like this. La, 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 la. What I need is la, 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 la. And they don't try to make la, 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 la. They do what for their instrument gives them a taller sound, right? Usually that particular mimicry technique in pedagogy often involves a very, very gently comic amount of exaggeration. But anyway, so when you're trying to figure out how to sing with more vibrato or less vibrato than you currently have, you have to be listening to a lot of singers and a variety of singers that you actually like the way they sound and they inspire you. So if you're looking to sing with less vibrato, find some singers who use very, very little vibrato who really still move you. Or find a choir that sings with almost zero vibrato, but their performance is really expressive and you love the way they tune the chords and the color is just beautiful. If you're looking to sing with more vibrato, find a singer in whatever genre you like that sings with a pronounced vibrato and just be inspired. Don't try to imitate, but saturate your ears with the sound that does to your emotions, to your heartstrings, what you want your voice to be able to do to somebody else's heartstrings. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you're not mimicking the tone, you're mimicking what they do and how they use the instrument. Okay? So saturate your ear with sound that you want to aspire towards. Now, final bit is the actual exercises. First of all, be a ghost. Go. Okay, now, see if you can do that less exaggeratedly, but not unexaggeratedly. That will sometimes allow a natural vibrato to reveal itself, because what you're asking the student to do is portamento. Portamento is defined as a glissando with vibrato. And when you do a glissando with vibrato, what you get is a chromatic scale. Right? At about quarter note equals 16th notes, a quarter note equals 96 for most people. All right? So that's one thing. If you're looking to develop more vibrato in your voice, that's one thing that you can do. I would say do it on all vowels, and do it in all pitch ranges. So, and do it wide first and then narrower and narrower. But keep in mind that the tone should always feel free and easy and relaxed. Okay? Try it low and very wide. Try it high and relatively narrow on an oo vowel. And just play around with it. Okay? So that's one exercise. The next exercise for encouraging vibrato is something that I've noticed over the years from my students when I do auditions with them. If you sing, ooh, the last note will usually have vibrato without the student thinking about it. Try it. Ready, and go. And you see what happens? The vibrato just happens on the last note. It will also work if you do 1, 3, 5 through 1. Ooh. develop vibrato within your own voice, do those exercises and try not to think about the vibrato until after you have hit the last note, and then focus your attention on the sound and see if you notice vibrato happening. And if you just keep with that particular exercise, you will most likely find that the final note of those patterns has a nice gentle vibrato that simply comes in without you thinking about it. The third thing takes advantage of this continuum. So you start super breathy, and then you edge towards a more and more focused sound to see if from super breathy, which we all discovered has almost no vibrato, to a more focused sound if the vibrato releases, okay? So on E, start super, super breathy, and then focus the tone and see if the vibrato releases itself. Ready, go. And the vibrato just sort of happens, right? You can do it on any vowel, and you can do it on any pitch. The other thing is the Broadway crescendo. So if you sing, I love you, ready, and go. I love you. Yeah, all right? So that's a fun one. And because we all have that Broadway crescendo that holds itself straight and then crescendos into vibrato in our ears, a lot of times that will stimulate the ear to make the voice do the right thing. And then the other thing is the jazz middle of the note vibrato, which you actually heard creep into my voice on the word love. I love you. Just try it. Ready? I love you. Right? So one is holding the tone straight and then adding the vibrato at the end, and the other one is adding the vibrato in the middle. Usually adding the vibrato in the middle works best on the highest note of the phrase if it's long enough. Okay? So those are some exercises for encouraging more vibrato. For minimizing vibrato, here's my soapbox moment. Do not try to sound like a boy soprano. Just don't do it. Children's voices, children have tiny, tiny, tiny little larynxes. That's why when they're out on the playground, they make these stratospherically high, sort of like baby pterodactyl sounds that if they do inside the house makes you just want to like prevent the human race from procreating ever again, right? So when a child sings at the pitches of an adult soprano, they're doing that with a much smaller larynx, and it has a completely different tone color. So when an adult soprano tries to imitate a child's voice, you're putting your larynx into all kinds of contortions to get a sound that your larynx is really not designed to do. So when you're minimizing vibrato, you should sound like yourself. You should sound like the best version of your own voice that just happens to be singing with a minimized vibrato. And every voice should sound different. And the way you unify a section of those different voices is by making sure that everyone matches vowel and matches dynamic and matches shape, but not matches intrinsic vocal quality, right? I mean, we can all edge our voices brighter or darker, and that is a component of balancing color within a section. But we don't want to try to sound like each other. Everybody has a unique instrument, and that's part of the beauty of humanity, right? So that's my soapbox moment. Now, if you say, hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
You'll notice that on the word hi, which was relatively long, you didn't speak with vibrato. All right, so just say, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
So when we're using our speaking voice, even when we draw a tone out, vibrato doesn't happen. Do it in the Julia Childs register and it'll be the same thing. So, ready? Hi! Hello! Hello! We're going to cook a chicken!
We're going to cook a chicken!
Right, and so when we did we're going to, we stretched the words out, but the vibrato still didn't kick in. Alright? So, this actually leads to my second hypothesis. My first hypothesis is that you have to want it. My second hypothesis is that the voice has to be doing something and going somewhere. in the case of what we were just doing, we were changing pitch gradually. Hi. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
So when we do a pitch slide, we usually don't have vibrato in it, unless we're doing the ghost exercise. So make the slide super slow. Hello, as if you're falling down off the cliff of the Grand Canyon. Hello. Good. Now make the pitch go up. Hello. Hello. Make the pitch go up so slowly that I can't tell that the pitch is changing. Hello. Hello. You were all singing a sustained pitch without vibrato. I know, exactly, it is a trick. So, now, if you substitute the idea of changing pitch with the idea of changing volume, hello, do that. Hello. You notice it's much easier to find the minimized vibrato tone when you're constantly doing something to the level of dynamic. And so my second hypothesis is directionality. Your voice has to be doing something that is interesting to your ear. If you try to just hold it steady without changing dynamic or pitch or anything, number one, it's super boring. And number two, the vibrato will normally resume because it has nothing better to do. Right? So just be boring for a second. Hello.
Hello.
Did you hear it creep in, right? Okay, now, do the crescendo diminuendo thing, but make it as slow as I indicate with my gesture. Ready? Hello. Now, an interesting thing happened. When we got to the top of the hairpin, a little vibrato crept in because for that split second it was static. So if you can make your hairpin absolutely change instantaneously from crescendoing to diminuendoing, if your objective is to minimize the vibrato across the entirety of the tone, don't let it have a static moment in the middle. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that leads me to the very last. So what we just did was called messa di voce. It's the Italian term for sending the voice. You're sending the voice and then recalling it back to you. Okay? And that leads me to the very last thing, and this is what distinguishes an artistic early music singer from a run-of-the-mill early music singer. An artistic early music singer who's singing with minimized vibrato has such beautiful phrase shaping that you are never for a second bored. And you're just enthralled with the beauty of the shaping of the sound. And so that's the final thing that you can do. Sing as musically as you possibly can, but make your phrase shaping the point. So I'm going to do this last thing with a phrase from, I'm just going to return to Messiah because it's gorgeous. And I'm going to teach this at a key that everybody can sing it in. And all of us altos and baritones have always wanted to sing this aria and have never been able to. This is going to be our chance to do it. So, okay? I know that. Just listen for a second. I'm going to come back over here. So, I'm going to sing this entire phrase with minimized vibrato, which you almost never hear any soprano do. I know that my Redeemer liveth. And my attempt there was to sing it with such expressive phrasing that I myself didn't get bored with my own sound. Okay? So just try it. Ready and go. I know that my Redeemer liveth. Now, we're used to hearing that with vibrato. So imagining it without vibrato takes a little bit of mental gymnastics, but make it your objective to sing with minimized vibrato, but with the most beautiful phrase shaping you can possibly muster. Ready and go.
I know that my Redeemer liveth.
Now, if your objective is to minimize vibrato, here is a trick that you can do within that idea of beautiful phrase shaping. If you hear the vibrato creeping in more than you want, accelerate your crescendo. Think about that for a second. I know that my... And so what I did was I overrode the creeping in of the vibrato with increased phrase energy. Ready and go.
I know that my Redeemer liveth.
And that, from all of you, had the least amount of vibrato, but it was also the most interesting. So I leave you with that, and the whole idea about singing with more vibrato or less vibrato is that I'm going to get mushy for a second. It should always be about the art. It should always be about communicating emotion and feeling and beauty, and whatever you do with your vibrato should be at the service of that thing. Thank you.
You're here. Cool. Very cool.
Questions?
So what do you do with the director who says, sing without vibrato? And
Well-
if you're wondering what that means.
Okay, if you're a all right, so here's a, tape's still rolling, right? We're going to leave this in the video. This is for all the singers out there who encounter a director who says, sing with zero vibrato. You sing with little enough vibrato that they stop asking. In other words, you give them what you think they want until they think they've gotten it enough that they shut up. So I'll say that's more vibrato than I need, or I'll say the vibrato needs to be minimized, or there's too much vibrato. But I almost never say sing without vibrato. I mean, first of all, because physiologically it's not a thing. Secondly, because when you have a choir of folks, having them conceptualize the sound without vibrato is useful, but that's not actually what they're physically doing. And so if a little bit of vibrato creeps in here or there, it's usually, as long as it's not too wide or too fast or too slow that it calls attention to itself vis-a-vis the other singers in the section, it's usually not going to be noticed by the audience. And so especially if you're a professional singer who's encountering a conductor that's not a singer, and they want you to sound like an organ or something, then what you do is you figure out a way to give them what they think they want while still singing healthily.
Okay.
And there are lots of different ways to pull that trick off. Sometimes it's a matter of keeping the vibrato very, very narrow the whole time. Sometimes it's a matter of letting there be a little bit more vibrato at climactic moments that are triadic. And one thing that this is beyond the scope of this talk, but usually you want less vibrato if the music has a lot of seconds and sevenths and ninths. But if it's just triads, then you can accommodate a little bit more vibrato without throwing the tuning off. And so if you're a professional singer singing for a conductor who wants you to sound like an organ, then you can add a little bit more vibrato on triadic harmonies, and they are less likely to notice than if you're singing like Larynx and when it's all seconds all the time.